Hello and welcome. Today's lecture will be about the art of Teotihuacan. So in today's lecture, we'll be reviewing the urban culture, the rise of the city-state, some of the locations we'll be looking at today. We'll begin by focusing on architecture with the Great Pyramids at Teotihuacan. Then we'll move on to look at paintings, sculptures, ceramics, masks, and other decorative arts, and we will finish with looking at the stylistic qualities of Teotihuacano art and cross-cultural influences with classic Maya art. So we will be looking at the art from this culture. We'll be identifying stylistic qualities, materials used by the Teotihuacanos in this city, and we will be doing our best to integrate what we know about these artworks into their cultural context. So the time period we're looking at for this site is between about 150 BC to 1150 AD. But for the most part, we kind of see the fall of Teotihuacan. We see it not being used by the Teotihuacanos after about 650 CE. So it kind of blends into the classic period a bit here. There is a bit of an overlap with the Zapotecs, the Toltecs, and the Maya during that formative and classic time period. So the area we're looking at now, we're moving away from looking at the Zapotecs down here, and we are up here really close to modern day Mexico City. If you want to visit Teotihuacan today, you can take a bus from Mexico City to get there. So we're moving a little bit away from the Olmec area as well. And as far as everything you need to know for time periods, just know late formative to early classic for the height of Teotihuacan. It was a massive urban center. This differentiates Teotihuacan from some of our other ceremonial sites that were more pilgrimage destinations that didn't house like an entire city at one time. But Teotihuacan does have many different barrios or apartment complexes, residential areas right along the city itself. We have this huge temple complex that runs around kind of the main artery of Teotihuacan, this large avenue called Way of the Dead. It's sometimes called Avenue of the Dead. We have very impressive pyramidal structures here, with the Pyramid of the Sun in the middle, going along an east-west axis, the Pyramid of the Moon, which is at the end of this great road, and then the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, also sometimes called the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, is a bit smaller, and it's in this plaza area called the Ciudadela. The name Teotihuacan was given by the Aztecs over 500 years after the decline of the city. So we get the names, the Avenue of the Dead, that's something that the Aztecs called it. And the name Teotihuacan is also from the Aztecs as well. We don't know exactly what the Teotihuacanos called themselves. We may never know that. So the name Teotihuacan roughly translates to the place of the gods in Nahua. It's also sometimes translated as the place where the gods are from or the birthplace of the gods. The Aztec Empire was hundreds of years after the decline of Teotihuacan, and they saw these impressive temple constructions. And they thought, this has to be the place that the gods are from because this is just so impressive. The Maya also knew about Teotihuacan. They do overlap. The Maya do overlap with Teotihuacan, unlike the Aztec. And it was known as Pu, or the reed place, by the Maya, which goes back to that term Toyan, which refers to like the glyph for a city or a civilization. The Aztec ruler Montezuma II actually made pilgrimages here regularly. He traveled by canoe. He followed a well-established route between Tenochtitlan and Teotihuacan. And again, the folks at in the Maya regions were also aware of Teotihuacan. We do not have a written language for Teotihuacan, so we can't read their texts. They do have glyphs that they do use, but it's not a full language like what we have with the Maya and other cultures. So this photo shows us the main avenue or way of the dead going down the heart of Teotihuacan. This is what the complex, the city looks like today. This is the Pyramid of the Moon here at the very end, surrounded by these other pyramidal forms. So very little is actually known about the people who built Teotihuacan. Unfortunately, as a result, that means that a lot of our knowledge about the site, its art and culture, are derived from Aztec sources. Most of Teotihuacan was actually created before the year 250 CE. And Teotihuacan is a testament to the ambition of its people who built the first American city on a grid plan. Teotihuacan also benefited from rulers or a ruling elite who commissioned these massive architectural landmarks, such as the pyramids that you see here. They also spread Teotihuacan's sphere of influence throughout Mesoamerica, even to the Maya region as far away as Guatemala, which we'll look at the end of class. But whenever we see huge, large-scale works of architecture, highly organized city planning, we know that there was an organization of a lot of people working together, which usually refers to some sort of social hierarchy. So unlike the Olmecs, we don't see like portraits of rulers or monuments that are very clearly specifically dedicated to one ruler. So we don't have like the cult of the leader, but there clearly was some sort of religious and political organization happening at this site. So here's another schematic drawing which shows the Street of the Dead or the Avenue of the Dead going pretty much along the magnetic north-south axis. We have the Pyramid of the Moon most notably at the end of this avenue. The Pyramid of the Sun is very centrally located in Teotihuacan, and then the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, or Temple of the Feathered Serpent in English. We have that in this other area called the Ciudadela. Something that we do notice that's absent at Teotihuacan, which we oftentimes see in other cities and ceremonial centers at this time, is a ball court. We don't see any plaza that looks like a ball court. So that is something that's kind of unique for Teotihuacan. Another thing that I mentioned that is different about Teotihuacan is we do have a lot of apartment complexes and residential neighborhoods all set out on a grid along this city. The Ciudadela down here is a large residential compound that was perhaps a palace for early rulers or some sort of highly elite priestly class of Teotihuacanos. We do have examples of colonial, like Spanish colonial era maps that mark some of Teotihuacan's biggest pyramids. This map, it was drawn and colored in the late 16th century, and it depicts the Teotihuacan Pyramid of the Moon at the lower left here. This is the Avenue or Street of the Dead along here. And this landscape includes paths and roads marked by footprints, and we also have some examples of colonial period Christian buildings as well. This is the Pyramid of the Sun. You can see the little sun over it with the shape of the pyramid, and we have some of the other like smaller buildings shown. It's interesting perspective. Everything's kind of being viewed from different angles all at once. So the city of Teotihuacan is aligned like many other Mesoamerican cities such as La Venta on that north-south axis. This alignment is made very explicit by the Way of the Dead, which extends more than 1.5 miles across the city. If you entered the city from the south, The avenue leads you to the city's three main architectural monuments, the Ciudadela, this southern sunken plaza with the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in it, the Pyramid of the Sun a little bit farther down the avenue, kind of very central to the city, and then the Pyramid of the Moon is located at the northernmost point. Behind that, we have the mountain called Cerro Gordo, which is an extinct volcano that very much frames the pyramid and demonstrates the harmonious relationship between architecture and natural topography. We also have another street which runs perpendicular to the Avenue of the Dead that follows the San Juan River. So here's a painting from 1878, which shows what Teotihuacan looked like in the modern era before Reconstruction in the early 20th century. So we see this kind of pointy, very pyramidal shaped structure, but we can see that it's showing a lot of signs of erosion, and we have a lot of brush and plants that have crept up along its sides. Again, here's a photograph from 1900, and this is what it looks like today. So as we are looking at these images during this lecture from Teotihuacan, it's important for us to know that what we are seeing is very heavily restored. So typically when these pyramidal structures were built, you would build a new facade or a bigger layer on top of the older one. So in a way, these pyramids are kind of like Russian nesting dolls. The outside is usually the newest layer, and then inside, the farther you like excavate inside, the older the layers are going to get. So at the turn of the 20th century, the Mexican government decided to restore many of these monuments at Teotihuacan, and they inevitably ended up, removing a lot of this rubble from the outside to show some of the better preserved older layers of these pyramids on the inside. So as you can see, this in 1900, it was a little pointier than it looks today. So there are pros and cons of reconstruction. Unfortunately, usually when we do practice reconstruction, some amounts of the original are lost. However, this may reveal other layers that are better preserved objectively. The Pyramid of the Sun was reconstructed in 1910 for the centennial of Mexico's War of Independence. So here we have pre-restoration reconstruction and post. This made Teotihuacan Mexico's most important ancient destination there in the early 20th century. And today, as many as 3 million visitors visit this location every year. And I wanted to show you all what this looks like on Google Earth. All right, so here on Google Earth, we are looking towards the Pyramid of the Moon. I believe the person taking this photo is standing on a little bit of a raised platform. I think it's nice to be able to look at some photos of these sites with people in them so you can understand just how massive they are. In the photographs, these smaller pyramidal structures look really little, but even they are very, very impressively large. We're looking south over the Avenue of the Dead now. This is the Pyramid of the Sun, which is kind of echoed by these ridge lines in the background. And it makes sense that the Aztecs coming back to this abandoned city might assume that this must be the place where the gods are from. This is an aerial view looking out above the Pyramid of the Moon, looking south over the Way of the Dead, Pyramid of the Sun, Temple of the Feathered Serpent. And Teotihuacan did have a lot of influence and potentially some colonies throughout Mesoamerica, which we explore at the end of this lecture. So we have the Teotihuacan heartland over here, and in green areas that we see a lot of evidence of influence in their culture and their art. All right, so Teotihuacan is located in the Valley of Mexico in the central highlands, very much kind of in this central kind of western area in Mexico. So late formative settlements here included elaborate cave precincts. There are a series of naturally occurring caves at this location. Many Mesoamerican cosmologies or worldviews have creation stories saying that some of the earliest people came out of caves underneath these world trees. So caves are thought of as this place of immersion. Again, that might have something to do with the Aztec belief that this was the kind of place of the gods as well. So the Pyramid of the Sun's steps align with the rising of the Pleiades at 2 annual zenith passages and the arc of the sun across the sky, creating an east-west axis. The central axis, or Way of the Dead, runs north-south, terminating at Cerro Gordo, the mountain, and again, the city is planned along a grid. Here's a layout again. This one is in your book. So the architecture here as both mass and space. We have the mass of these great temples. We have open space plazas. We have ritual walkways and interior volumes within the palace compound. The Aztec term Way of the Dead may have referred to the ancestral shrines which lined it. The Way of the Dead changed in elevation several times, which forces you as a pedestrian to walk up and down stairs. Thus, it's kind of commanding and controlling your experience of visiting this city and walking this Avenue of the Dead. The Talud Tablero is a signature piece of Teotihuacan architecture that we'll be looking at during this lecture. A Talud Tablero is like a cross section of architecture. It delineated sacred architecture in Teotihuacan, and we see it in provincial architecture. But basically, the tablero is this kind of flat terraced shelf, and then the talud is this sloping area between these right angle shelves. So we have the tablero here, the talud slants, the tablero creates this right angle shelf. And again, we have the slant called the talud. So the first monument we'll look at is the Pyramid of the Sun. The Pyramid of the Sun reaches over 200 feet in height, and it was the tallest structure in the Americas at the time. It was built over a naturally occurring cave system, and it's unclear to us today who or what the pyramid was built to commemorate, but the Aztecs referred to it as the Pyramid of the Sun, and so that's why we call it the Pyramid of the Sun. Art historians have suggested that the creation mythology may be that issue, since Aztec and Maya sources refer to caves as places of origin and fertility. The pyramid was meant to be viewed and approached from the east, hence the rising of the sun comes from the east. Visitors can still climb the pyramid's steep staircase today, which originates near the Avenue of the Dead and rises over 5 levels to what is now a bare, flattened top. This pyramid was heavily constructed, so its original shape may have appeared somewhat differently than what it appears today. And in illustrations, in murals that we see at Teotihuacan, it shows a lot of decoration and probably ephemeral temple structures built on top of these pyramids. And so that, of course, is lost today, but there was probably originally a lot of sculpture and actual temple buildings on the top of these much more solid pyramidal forms. The base of this pyramid is over 700 feet wide. The natural cave that it's built over is over 330 feet long, and it is the central feature of Teotihuacan. This ridgeline that it's framed by when you view it from the Pyramid of the Moon is Sierra de Puebla, and these excavations are still currently happening around this pyramid as well. This view that we see here in this historical painting again shows us the Pyramid of the Sun framed by Sierra de Puebla. Again, this is what it looked like before and after its reconstruction. This is what the Pyramid of the Sun looks like. Very, very, very imposing from as you approach it from the east. You have all these staircases so that you have the two on the side, which forces people to approach from the side, and then it forces them to reconverge, go up, then separate again, then go back up. So in many ways, architecture can direct traffic and kind of impose its own control on people. So it's kind of forcing you to take this very processional route up to the top of the pyramid. This is what it looks like above. You can see all this intricate geometry from this aerial view. So again, if you do decide to visit Teotihuacan, or perhaps some of you have, you can make the climb up those steps up to the top of this absolutely ginormous structure. Next up, we'll look at Pyramid of the Moon. This one was built by 100 CE. The Avenue of the Dead leads directly to this pyramid. As you can see in this photograph, it does echo the shape of Cerro Gordo, the mountain directly behind it. So it kind of has this little dip in the middle. It was once called Tanan, which means our mother of stone. It is slightly smaller than the Pyramid of the Sun, but it is still absolutely massive. Again, the Avenue of the Dead leads up to the steps of this great pyramid. It's also surrounded by these smaller pyramidal structures. And it has this interesting kind of projecting porch coming off of it, which is something that we'll see repeated in a provincial pyramid in Guatemala as well. Early Spanish explorers noted that there used to be a large statue on top of the Pyramid of the Moon. They believe that it's this great goddess, so-called great goddess statue, also known as Coatlicue. This is this enormous blocky statue that was found in a pile of rubble nearby the Pyramid of the Moon. It's thought to be from the early Classic era. It's more than 10 feet tall. And it was probably originally removed by the Spanish. If it was up there, it was probably originally removed by the Spanish to eliminate any chance of idolatry. So if this large statue had been atop the Pyramid of the Moon, the cleft in the headdress may have matched up with the dip from this old volcano that we see at the top of Cerro Gordo right behind it. This is a picture of a man next to the Coatlicue sculpture in around 1910. You can see this little divot right here, and this statue has gone under some reconstruction and restoration as well. And one last impressive view of Pyramid of the Moon as seen by the Avenue of the Dead. In the structure that abuts the pyramid, this structure right here where the stairs start, we see that Tulud Tablero architectural element being utilized. And this is what it looked like before its restoration. It was looking pretty eroded and pretty overgrown. This is what it looked like circa 1910 to 1920. All right, next up, we're going to look at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. So the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent occupies a prominent space in the Ciudadela, a large open space that offers a respite from the massive presence of the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. And like so much else at Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent was built in this Tulud Tablero style, which we can see over here on the side. This temple particularly stands out for its sculptural ornamentation, depicting the feathered serpent, which is known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. So if you hear people talking about the pyramid of or the temple of Quetzalcoatl, it's the same thing. The plumed serpent, the feathered serpent, they're talking about this structure right here. So it was also built by 200 CE, located in that large plaza known as the Ciudadela. It was unfortunately covered up by another building, which is known as the Adosada around 300 CE. However, because it was covered up by the Adosada, it actually perfectly preserved this western facade. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at this area of the Adosada that has been excavated to reveal this facade. And this one particularly celebrates and commemorates warfare. So in the late 19th century, archaeologists excavated this buried western facade, which revealed these incredibly carved masks and feathered serpent heads. And in the late 20th century, archaeologists discovered 133 bound human skeletons that were dressed as warriors in its foundations, which show us that something about human sacrifice or the sacrifice of warriors was very important to the establishment of this monument. In 2003, a 330-foot man-made tunnel was discovered in front of and going directly underneath this temple. So it kind of echoes the natural cave system that we see at Pyramid of the Sun, but this time it is man-made. Here we can take a look at it on Google Earth. So we have these very, very steep steps coming up. This pyramid is much smaller than the Pyramid of the Sun and Moon, but its facade, the western facade, which is what we're looking at now, is very well preserved and very much stands out for these huge, humongous stone carved heads that we see. Where this person is taking this photo is the Adosada. So that is this building that was kind of just plopped right on top of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. So again, this is where it's located. So it's centrally located in this sunken courtyard. The Adosada shows this kind of porch coming off the edge of it. And where we were looking was where they just excavated right in the middle to reveal this temple. So many of these sacrificed victims that we find buried at the base of the Feathered Serpent Pyramid may have been a dedication to the gods at the construction of the pyramid. What we find here is that these warriors are dressed as Teotihuacanos. They're not foreigners that were captured and sacrificed. So we're not sure if the Teotihuacanos actually maybe sacrificed themselves for this, or if they maybe dressed foreign captives as Teotihuacanos. That's kind of unclear, but if we compare it with Aztec cosmology, the Aztecs believed that their gods killed themselves at Teotihuacan to make the sun come up. So they practiced something called auto-sacrifice, which is where they sacrificed their own blood to make sure that time kept moving for the rest of the world. And then the gods were reborn as the sun and the moon. So again, these gods, according to Aztec beliefs, sacrifice themselves to create time and cosmic order. So it's not out of the question that perhaps the Teotihuacanos sacrificed themselves, or maybe volunteered to sacrifice other Teotihuacanos for this dedication. But this is some of the evidence of human sacrifice at the Feathered Serpent Pyramid. One of the reasons why it seems to be human sacrifice is you can see these arms are bound behind, the hands seem to be bound behind them, which usually people who willingly died are not tied up. The Ciudadela down here, where the plumed serpent temple is located, could hold 100,000 people at a time. So it was likely a space for large-scale ritual and meeting. Here's a view of it from the side. You can see the Talud Tablero aspect here with these beautiful architectural elements. Here we can see up close the motifs of the plumed serpent. So it's got this kind of dragon-like, snake-like head with the plumes coming off of it. Again, the Aztecs had a god known as Quetzalcoatl, which is the plumed serpent. So we're not sure if this is the exact same deity, just because we don't know for sure, because the Teotihuacanos didn't write and tell us about it, but there could be a connection there with the Aztec deity of Quetzalcoatl. We see these shells along the side, so this association with water and the ocean. Here we have conch shells, which were also used as trumpets by many of these Mesoamerican warriors. And then we have this other kind of mask-like face that appears alongside the plumed serpent. And this has sometimes been interpreted as being some sort of storm or rain god. It has these big goggles. The Aztecs called their storm god Tlaloc, and he's oftentimes shown with these large goggles. So the feathered serpent is always associated with water imagery. It is depicted numerous times on the outside of this temple. And it's shown as this undulating snake navigating among seashells. The faces that project outward include the feathered serpent, and then this one hasn't been necessarily, like, there's not a huge consensus on what exactly this one is identified as, but again, it could be the Aztec god Tlaloc. Most scholars agree that this temple was associated with warfare and human sacrifice, which has been confirmed by numerous skeletal remains that appear to be of warriors that were discovered by archaeologists in the 1980s. Speculation has also arisen about whether the pyramid of the feathered serpent may have contained the body of a ruler. Here's another view of these repeated motifs, again with the seashells and the undulating body of the serpent. All right, so let's talk about this mysterious man-made tunnel that exists underneath this temple. So since 2003, Sergio Gomez Chavez, I think oftentimes I see his name just written Sergio Gomez. But same person, has led a team of excavators deep into the ground. They discovered a sinkhole in front of this pyramid after some heavy rain, and Gomez was actually lowered down into it, like not even wearing a real climbing harness. He just tied a rope like around his body and just got excavated down into this huge like well-like shaft. And he found a man-made tunnel that leads underneath the heart of the temple of the feathered serpent. The tunnel ends in pools of mercury where 4 figures stood at the liquid's edge. There's a PBS video. I attached it to Canvas. So if you want to pause this video and go there right now, it's so cool. It's very claustrophobic, just warning you. But Gomez is like crawling down through these really tight tunnels. And then eventually they got a drone, not a drone, but like a little robot on wheels, a remote control robot to film because it got pretty claustrophobic down there. But what's interesting about that tunnel is, just like the Avenue of the Dead, it changes elevations from like lower elevation of walking to higher elevation on purpose, just to make it harder for you. Maybe make it more of like a meditation. I'm not sure. But here's a picture of Sergio Gomez Chavez in a tunnel under Teotihuacan. So you can see there's been some lights added in here, and hopefully his hand is okay now. So the tunnel is 50 feet below the surface. Here at the tunnel entrance, we have a 40-foot deep shaft that leads to a tunnel going west. Gomez's team explored this cave from 2009 to 2016. They discovered it back in 2003, but you have to get a lot of permission before you can just go digging and exploring underneath largely tourist visited sites like this. So this shows the Autosada. This is where all the facades are, right here in the middle. And here we have some images from what they found at the end of this tunnel. So we have these 4 figures that have perhaps been identified as being ancestral figures. They appear kind of ageless and genderless. We also have this huge pile of conch shells, which have an association with the feathered serpent, as well as being possible instruments for blowing the horn when you go to war. So, because this is one of the most sacred places in all of Teotihuacan, the archaeologists here believe that it could have been used for the rulers to acquire divine endowment, allowing them to rule on the surface, is something that Gomez said. And initial studies by the National Institute of Anthropology and History show the tunnel functioned until around 80 or 250 CE, when it was closed off. They probably thought forever until Gomez's team decided to come through. But here are some of the objects found at the end of the tunnel. Just really incredible to see these works of art in their original setting. Here's one of the other burials at Teotihuacan, showing potential sacrificial victims with different ceremonial blades, human figures. We'll look at those a little more closely here soon. And again, these plumed serpent heads and conch shells. Oh, each one of these heads weighs more than 4 tons each, by the way. And here is a photo showing the reconstruction of the feathered serpent in 1921. So they had to remove a bunch of rubble to reveal these incredible, incredible sculptures. Teotihuacan was a very heavily painted site. All over, thick polychrome applied to exterior sculptures on early buildings would eventually change into later flat wall painting. Oftentimes, a layer of stucco and plaster would be placed over walls. A lot of times these pigments would be added while this plaster was still wet, creating fresco murals. So these barrios, or apartments in the city, contained some of the most well-preserved frescoes in Teotihuacan, although probably a lot of the larger monuments originally had painting on the outside that just haven't been preserved as well. We see a lot of this beautiful signature red, kind of deep red-orange color that was created with cinnabar. And we see a lot of motifs including knives with bleeding hearts, a lot of people in profile making offerings to deities or ancestors, as well as depictions of wildlife, crops, weather events, temples. So let's get into it. So these residential compounds fill the quadrants of Teotihuacan. The residential apartment would oftentimes include shrines and a platform for these semi-public, probably family-based rituals. The residential buildings appear to be the product of state construction because they're so uniform. And there's also evidence of a Oaxaca barrio that housed Zapotecs at Teotihuacan. It shows Zapotecs burials and Oaxaca urns. So we could think of this like to some of today's modern cities, like San Diego has Little Italy, San Francisco has Chinatown. So perhaps there are these like ethnic neighborhoods within Teotihuacan. Evidence also suggests Maya and Veracruz quarters, perhaps embassies where visiting dignitaries from other cultures and cities would come to stay in this city. All right. This is the Zacuala compound at Teotihuacan. Its walls were lined with brilliant stucco paintings. Many of these apparently enhanced devotion and guided the supplicants to chambers for worship. So these are different dwelling places for different families, and they would oftentimes share these like patio courtyards where we see evidence of shrines and kind of like ritual sites. Some of these apartment complexes also include burials of ancestors and relatives within them. So it's highly likely that some of these more private ceremonial areas may have been related to ancestor veneration or ancestral cults as well. So here's a reconstruction of one of the 2 mirror image paintings that framed a doorway at Tepantitla in Teotihuacan. Here we have a path marked with footprints. So you see those little footprints. We see a priest in a netted jaguar suit that is approaching a temple. This is the temple right here. People may have taken on the priest's role stepping through the doorway. So this might have shown you like what you were doing as you made your procession through this doorway. This figure may represent a netted jaguar. So if you look closely, you can see a human form, but wearing this kind of netted costume. And this may be like a reconstruction of actual large cats that were netted up and used as sacrifices at this site. Everywhere where you see these bright green plumes, we can think of the quetzal bird, that beautiful iridescent shiny bright green bird where the males only have 2 of those big long feathers. So these show very important people. And this image of the temple can give us an idea of what the temples on top of these pyramidal platforms at Teotihuacan may have looked like when they were originally brightly painted and probably covered in architectural and sculptural elements in their original state. We also have these kind of cloud-like patterns behind as well, and these really ornate borders. This is a reconstruction of a mural from the Tepantitla barrio in Teotihuacan. This reconstruction is at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Here we have this frontally facing figure with 2 figures standing in profile. The background is this deep red made from cinnabar. Underneath this figure, here I'll show you a little bit of a closer up. Underneath this figure, we have this cave-like opening where we have seeds. So again, going back to that idea of caves as being origins for this worldview. Outside of these, outside of this cave-like opening, we have these waves, which seem to be watering and nourishing agriculture. So we've got these plants popping up. The figure itself is wearing this giant bird-like headdress, but that's not the actual figure's face. The actual figure's face is more of a mask. We can see these 2 diamond-shaped eyes, this nose piece, and earplugs. There are hands from which emit teardrop shapes, which are probably water. Sometimes this figure has been identified as being some sort of rain goddess. These people approaching this figure seem to be much more clearly human beings. They have human faces and they are wearing these quetzal headdresses, but we can see that they're real humans with real faces. Coming up from the sides of this figure, we have these tree branches. One of the tree branches has spiders coming off of it. So here's a spider. The red one has spiders, and the yellow one has butterflies. In later Mesoamerican cultures, we have spiders really associated with weaving and with gendered women's roles. And we also have an association with butterflies as being the spirits of deceased warriors. So we have like different kind of gender binary gender roles coming up out of this figure that's a bit more ambiguous. I'll talk about this a little bit later when we look at incense burners, but I have a feeling this may actually represent a ancestral figure, but we'll get to that in a moment. We also have paintings of like this one, which shows this eaglet with blood coming out of its beak. This one is from the Tepantitla barrio. And this mural shows these highly stylized coyotes with these large claws kind of grasping and fighting over a deer. We can see that it's a deer because of these antlers that it has. But again, we see this strong preference for showing things in profile in general, this deep red background and kind of these really bright bluish turquoises as well. Painting is also transferred to 3-dimensional objects in Teotihuacan art. Teotihuacan is very famous for these tripod vessels, so these kind of cylindrical vessels with 3 little feet at the bottom. Here we have an example which shows a frontal figure very similar to this one right here. We have this goggled figure, which is sometimes associated with the Aztec rain god Tlaloc. We can see the earplugs, the goggle-like eyes, the frontal nature, the plumed headdress. On this side, we see another person with a goggle-shaped eye. We see that they're wearing this nose piece. They're shown in profile with a scroll coming out of their mouth and this really ornately plumed headdress as well. All right, let's move on to looking at some of these sculptures, ceramics, and decorative arts of Teotihuacan. So stone sculpture at Teotihuacan is oftentimes very large, but it can be small. We do see an absence of what appear to be individual ruler portraits, although some of these masks may have individual identities. And the 6th century CE shows a pattern of destroying and burying cult objects. So first we have some jadeite offerings from the burial 5 from the Pyramid of the Moon. This is the richest burial that has come to light so far at Teotihuacan, and it contained 3 cross-legged individuals, and one of whom might be represented by this seated figure. This also includes jewelry and adornments that may have been made by the Maya. There are Maya works that are stylistically similar to this, although this seated figure is unlike anything else previously known. But we have these beautifully carved beads, these ear spools, and other adornments here along with this small seated figure. Here is a close-up of the warrior necklace. This was buried on one of the sacrificial warrior victims at the Feathered Serpent temple here at Teotihuacan. So this includes shells that have been carved to look like human teeth, and also entire whole human upper palates with all the teeth inside. So these are pretty gruesome necklaces. This is how they were found. So some of them were buried, or most of them were buried being worn by their warrior captive sacrificial victims here from the burials under the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. And they really do create this kind of repetitive harmony, and would have definitely had a psychological impact on the person viewing a warrior wearing these palettes representing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, representing 8 different victims, previous victims. So talk about psychological impact there. This is the Great Goddess. This one we looked at briefly in relationship to the fact that it may have originally appeared on the top of the Moon Pyramid. This one's referred to as the Great Goddess, or Coatlicue. And here we have this very blocky figure. It's very much unlike the Olmec figures that are very lifelike and very naturalistic. This one seems very purposefully blocky, very purposefully kind of flat and two-dimensional in many ways. The only kind of overlap stylistically this has with Olmec art is that little cleft in the head. We sometimes see that in Olmec depictions, but really kind of unique to Teotihuacan. So again, she's found between the rubble between the Pyramid of the Moon and the Palace of Quetzalcoatl, and she's believed to have sat on top of the Pyramid of the Moon. She's perhaps wringing water from her garment. So she's been identified as potentially being a water goddess, and also potentially having a relationship to that mural that we were looking at earlier. All right, next up is a figure known as the Zala figure because of where it was found. It's a standing figure. It's perhaps from around 500 or 550 CE. And this is one figure that has gone through some sort of ritual destruction. So this figure may have been bound before being brutally destroyed by dozens of blows. It has now been restored. Again, it's from the Zala residential compound, and it is one of the many examples that we have from Teotihuacan that shows destruction and burning of religious objects in the 6th century CE. Here's a close-up of the face, which you can see it has been restored. It was shattered into many, many, many different pieces. And this image shows it at the De Young Museum in 2018. So it's pretty large. I think my friend's about 5'6" or 5'7". So it's a pretty substantially sized figure. We also have an interesting piece called, it's known as the Stela of Laventia. It is from the Laventia barrio at Teotihuacan. This topmost part probably represents a feathered shield, and this kind of marker may have been used to play a ball game that is outside of the regular conventional ball court that we see in other places across Mesoamerica. And there is a similar object found at Tikal. Again, this might speak to the overlapping of cultures in the world of Teotihuacan. Here we see a little bit more up close. And in the period of Teotihuacan domination of the Pitan Maya, in the last quarter of the 4th century CE, Tikal sculptures worked on an object of similar form inscribed with Maya texts. So this may speak to that cultural interchange that happened with the Maya. This one does not have Maya glyphs on it. This one is looking very Teotihuacano, but it may refer to a ball game played outside of the regular court. Teotihuacan is very well known for their masks. Some of them may have been dressed or venerated. Some of them may have been attached to funerary bundles. Many of them are made of serpentine, cave onyx, or granite. Oftentimes these masks show these kind of serene, ageless, and kind of genderless faces. The masks seem to kind of shroud identity. Although some may stand in for individuals, we really don't see that same kind of portraiture aspect that we see in Olmec art with our Teotihuacan masks. This one is from 200 to 650 CE, and it shows this beautiful mosaic of spondylus shell, which is the coral color, turquoise, obsidian, and amazonite. Remember that Teotihuacan is in central Mexico, so this spondylus shell would have been a luxury item that had to be imported. So we see this these same signature colors that the Teotihuacanos love to use in their paintings, this kind of deep red orange, and then these kind of turquoisey jade greens, remaining very important to Teotihuacan art. Next up, we'll look at a type of vessel that we see pretty commonly throughout Teotihuacan, specifically in residential complex, like residential settings. They're these urns that are actually used for incense burning. So this is a large censer with eagle imagery. These are fairly common. I have another one on this slide as well. So oftentimes they are made out of mold-made, mass-produced facets. So all of these little features, these little kind of charms, these little decorative elements are made with molds and then seem to be able to be reworked in different organizations to perhaps represent different types of individuals or deities or ancestors. This particular one with all this eagle imagery is thought to probably serve the cult of warriors. And what you would do is you would put copal or rubber and burn things within, and plumes of smoke would like come out of it. So this is actually a multi-sensory experience with this particular type of work of art. So they're kind of cone-shaped with these mask-like faces and decorative elements all around. And they may have a connection to mummy bundles and ancestor cults. So this one's made out of painted ceramic. This one's the large censer with eagle imagery. Here's another one from Teotihuacan, again, made out of these mass-produced parts that could be rearranged to create different combinations of these incense burners for different households. And remember that the Teotihuacanos did bury ancestors in the floors of their barrios or apartment complexes. Perhaps this does represent a mummy bundle. This one is a reenactment of an Aztec funeral ceremony. So these mummy bundles with masks are very common for Aztecs, the later culture in this area. And then above right, we have a drawing of a Mixtec mortuary bundle with a mask attached to it as well. So this could very well represent an ancestor. It could also represent some sort of deity. But I personally see a very strong connection between the like physical elements that we see in these incense burners and what we see with like the shape and the decoration of these mummy bundles. So I also feel like this figure with the mask face and that the people are giving offerings to may very well connect with this idea of the ancestor. Again, this painting is also from a residential complex, so it may have more to do with personal, like family ancestral rights than a state religion. We also have these very kind of engaging and active figures made out of ceramic at Teotihuacan. This is one example of a figure of a man dancing. This one is only about 4 inches tall, so it's very small, but ceramic figures were made throughout the history of Teotihuacan, and early figures are very tiny and agile like this one. They were found in abundance and eventually mass-produced with mold-made pieces as well. So that's something that we see within Teotihuacan is this really strong, almost like corporate art style, where a lot of the different like paintings and works of art seem to be mass-produced, state-produced, really aesthetically cohesive to each other. Let's go back to one of the burials at the Moon Pyramid. This one included 12 sacrificial victims and at least 47 sacrificed animals. At the center here, so at the center of this sacrificed cache, we have these 9 pairs of obsidian blades, and one of them is really like very detailed, looking like this serpent with like a rattle end of its tail. Others are rather serpentine in form, and I've heard scholars talk about these being representations of lightning bolts. So there seems to be a connection here between the powers of air and lightning and centering the ritual before the sacrifices. By the way, obsidian is a volcanic, naturally occurring volcanic glass stone. It's usually black, but it can be kind of reddish in color. And the Teotihuacanos love to make blades and ceremonial objects out of it. It can be polished very, very smoothly to the point where it's almost mirror-like. And the edges of obsidian, when cut right or chipped away right, are so sharp that modern surgeons oftentimes prefer obsidian blades to blades made out of metal because the obsidian is more sturdy and can be more sharp. So it's a very precious, naturally occurring resource that you need to be in a volcanic area to have. So very, very sharp. So they had practical knives and ceremonial knives. I would imagine that this snake one is probably ceremonial, but it is a very practical material to make knives and sharp things out of, and we see that happening all over the Americas where they have access to this. Here it is in situ at the Pyramid of the Moon, so we see all of these serpentine blades facing inward, surrounded by sacrificial victims at the Pyramid of the Moon. And here's that snake-shaped blade a little bit more up close. I feel like it would be really hard to grab that because your hand would get cut. So I think it's ceremonial, but we're not sure. All right, let's wrap up this lesson by looking at some of the stylistic qualities of Teotihuacan art and cross-cultural influences with classic Maya art. So again, we have the talud tablero that designates sacred structures at Teotihuacan. And nearly 700 miles away from Teotihuacan, at Camino Huyu, we see a manifestation of Teotihuacan's provincial power. So by the way, that's in Guatemala, which is not Mexico anymore. So it's like all the way past the Yucatan Peninsula. So looking at the inside of this sculpture, we see these little mold-made objects, and we've seen these mold-made objects on those incense burners. This is something that Teotihuacan mass-produced, these little decorative elements. So Teotihuacano artists would produce hollow host objects, like this human figure here, that would bear tiny, solid, mold-made figures and adornments inside of their bodies. Examples have been found as far as Guatemala, and this one from Bacan is 750 miles away from Teotihuacan. These works dedicated a Maya structure in around 550 BCE, which is getting towards kind of the end of Teotihuacan's prominence. So this one was, we have this Teotihuacan produced art that was placed inside of a Maya tripod vessel, but even the Maya tripod vessel is a borrowed style from Teotihuacan. These cylindrical vessels with the 3 feet, those are Teotihuacano. And finally, let's look at Cholula, which is located in the Valley of Puebla. We see a very large pyramid here at Cholula, and the area here flourished in many periods and probably benefited from Teotihuacan's decline around 600 or 650 CE. Today, if you go to Cholula, the pyramid is pretty overgrown with plants and trees. There's actually a Catholic church on top of it now, which probably replaced the original temple that was there before that. But there's been a lot of work done at this site to unearth the terraces beneath. And most of the terraces revealed by archaeologists date to around the 1st millennium CE. At Camino Huyu in Guatemala, we have another site that's being excavated. This is an area where Teotihuacan actually invaded, and we have structures here that were built in the Teotihuacan style before 500 CE. One particular structure, known as Structure B4, is a small-scale adobe replica of the Pyramid of the Moon. So remember how the Pyramid of the Moon had that big staircase? This is the Pyramid of the Moon. This is B4. So Pyramid of the Moon has this central staircase. It has this multi-tiered, multi-layered pyramidal shape, and then this big kind of platform porch coming out the front with the talud tablero. We see something happening very similar here with Structure B4, but on a much smaller level. It's still large, it's just not on the same level as the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan before 200. This one was created after 400. And here is a better look at this reconstruction drawing. All right, well, that wraps up our look at Teotihuacan. For some reason, the site was slowly abandoned around 600 or 650 CE. Your book talks about some of the ways that scholars speculate what happened, whether it was drought or crop failure or other powers moving in from the north. But after 650 CE, Teotihuacan was no longer inhabited by its the original people group that built it, and it was a legend in its time, and it would continue to be a legend afterwards, especially with the Aztecs coming back to venerate this site as a pilgrimage site and remember it as the place of the gods. So I'll end this lecture with a quote by Sergio Gomez. He says, in Aztec mythology, they claim the universe itself was created in Teotihuacan. That is the solar system they live in, the great cosmic balance in which they live in, that had gone through 4 previous creations, existences, and destructions, and that the 5th age began in Teotihuacan. All right, that does it for today. Remember, you can always message me if you have any questions about anything. Make sure to do your reading in your textbook, The Art of Mesoamerica, and I'll catch you next time.